So we have, remember, till 4:30. Hopefully we can get done before that time. And in about 10 minutes time, we're going to take another break for half an hour, but we'll be able to get it done. Don't worry. Hopefully maybe even closer to 4. So this chapter is about fair housing and the legislation about federal fair housing laws and the New Jersey laws against discrimination. So at the end of this chapter, you should be able to identify protections of the federal fair housing laws, including enforcement, as well as describe the protections of the New Jersey law against discrimination, including state regulations on rentals, and discuss the implication of fair housing laws for brokers and salespeople. We're going to go and delve into Mount Laurel, that kind of stuff. Housing discrimination based on income. So we're going to talk about that later. But to start off, we have to understand that there's federal, state, and local laws about human rights and the housing effect and their rights, and fair housing effect and how it affects rentals and sales, so that we can create a single, unbiased housing market with equal opportunity to every financially qualified home seeker. I feel like you should be waving a little flag when I say that stuff. But the fact is, guys, anybody who can financially qualify to buy or rent has the right to buy or rent anywhere they want to. We can't discriminate for many different reasons. And realtors are a separate class of human, by the way. You're going to pledge an oath to never discriminate in your business practices. If you have a problem with that, maybe now's the time to get rid of the textbook and your course session, because if you have any intention of discriminatory behavior in this business and you practice it, you'll probably lose your license and may suffer criminal and civil penalties as well. I'm being very serious. We take fair housing very, very serious in the real estate community. Yes, there have been many issues with discriminatory behavior. And yes, many realtors who have done and been caught have lost their licenses, never to be allowed back in the business again. So let's understand these rules and what happens if you fail to comply with these federal fair housing laws. There's penalties and things that could be instituted against the person. It could be a loss of license as well, and declared a criminal or civil act that could be sued in court on. So first, we're going to talk about the federal fair housing laws, the federal body of law about protections in the housing business. It all started way back ago, a long time ago in a galaxy far. Oh no, that's another story. Sorry. It all started right after the Civil War. Now, if you ever studied U.S. history, you remember that America had a civil war back in the 1860s. In 1863, President Lincoln made the Emancipation Proclamation declaring that all slaves must be freed. Well, the southern states in the U.S. territory said, forget you, Lincoln, we're keeping our slaves. And we went to a civil war about slavery. So, in the end, the South did lose the war. Now, I'm especially aware of this because I married a girl from Richmond, Virginia. Been married going on 33 years to the same gal, love her to death. But her family is from the Deep South. My marriage to this woman for 33 years does not forgive the fact that I'm still a Yankee. I'm being serious here, guys. If you have friends or relatives in the South, they haven't gotten over the fact that this war ended in the North's favor. They don't like that. They refer to it as our late great unpleasantries or something like that. The unfortunate war between the states. The fact is this: the Civil War ended, slavery was declared unconstitutional, and slaves were freed. Yes, there was additional issues when our expansion went westward through the Dred Scott agreements and all those other things. But the fact is that civil rights were a big issue. Black people were notoriously discriminated against because they were slaves and were treated as such. So in 1866, the Congress of the United States came out with a new law that said no man shall be deprived of opportunity because of his race, meaning at the time, skin color. Now, the Civil Rights Act of 1866 still exists, and there are no exceptions to the Civil Rights Act of 1866 ever. In other words, you can never discriminate on race. Ever. There's never an instance where it's acceptable. So everybody at that time agreed that this discrimination stuff is all over with and we don't have to worry about it again. Well, sadly, did we realize the true nature of man would come out. In fact, in the southern parts of the U.S., discrimination wasn't so blatant, really. It was just called segregation, or separate but equal. Now, I'm old enough to remember as a kid when we drove down to Florida to visit my mom's parents. On our trip down, we stopped in Georgia for a bite to eat, and when I got out of the car, I was confronted with two different entrances to the same cafe. There was a white entrance, and over here was a colored entrance, and I didn't understand at the time. What happened was America turned into a segregationist country. Blacks over here, whites over here. Give them separate but equal facilities, and that way everybody's equal. Well, that in and of itself is completely discriminatory. Whenever you separate a people or cause a schism among people because of the color of their skin, that's racial discrimination, plain and simple. So for 100 years, our country wallowed in segregationism, civil rights activities. We celebrated Martin Luther King's birthday yesterday, or at least his birthday, as far as I know. The great civil rights leader of the 50s and 60s, who was sadly assassinated in 1968 by an assassin's bullet. Federal fair housing laws say you can't discriminate based on race. But in 1968, the new Federal Fair Housing Act was created under Title VIII. And race and color then were defined as non-discriminatory categories. You could no longer discriminate based on race, color, religion, and national origin. That law then was amended in 1974 to include sex. Women notoriously were always discriminated against as far as credit was concerned. If you don't believe me, guys, talk to your moms, grandmas, aunts, big sisters who were alive back then. I can tell you, as a matter of fact, women were routinely turned away from credit before 1974 because they didn't have a husband. Very few women were able to gain independence through financial freedom. So sex was an added classification in 1974. And then in 1988, physical and mental disabilities were included, as well as familial status, which means families with children under the age of 18. So since 1988, it's been illegal for landlords to say, no children allowed. But they have been doing it and still do it today. Even though it's declared a federally protected class, people still discriminate against it today. People still discriminate against race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability. They still do it. Why? Because we're evil people. I like to think that we're all good folks. But no, that's not the case, guys. There are some people that truly are evil and have ill intent in their hearts. As a realtor, you're going to pledge and make an oath to the fact that you will not discriminate in your business practices ever. I hope that you can raise your hand and make that sincere pledge at some point before you start your career. Because if you can't, then there's no room in this business for you, I'm sorry to say. Now, I'm not trying to preach from a moral high horse here or anything, guys. I'm just telling you as the facts lie. The real estate community has very little tolerance for any type of discrimination. And if found out, those people are disciplined and disciplined severely. I promise you. And I'll give an example a little later. So you can't deny housing because of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, Mental or physical disabilities, by the way, physical disabilities now at 1988 included protection against AIDS. People who had AIDS you can't discriminate against, and familial status. Now, under the Federal Fair Housing, it was proven under the Jones versus Meyer lawsuit back in 1965 through 1968. In 1965, a man of color, Mr. Jones, tried to buy a house from the Mayer Company. The Mayer Company said, no, you're not a person of the right skin color, so we're not selling a house to you. Mr. Jones sued and won his case in federal court. As penalty, the Mayer Company was forced to sell Mr. Jones a house in 1968 for the price he would have bought it for in 1965, causing that business a loss on the sale of that house. Whether you deem that to be justice or not is irrelevant. The fact is that because of that, it proved that no one was allowed to discriminate because of race in the selection of housing candidates. Now, in New Jersey, and according to the federal fair housing laws, every real estate broker must post, and you'll find this poster on page 66, the Equal Housing Opportunity poster. It must be conspicuously displayed in every real estate broker's office. If it is not conspicuously displayed, meaning everybody can see it, and it's not clearly evident to anybody walking into that office that it even is there, that broker could suffer a $100 a day penalty for noncompliance. And here's the worst part. In the case of a legal suit against discriminatory behavior, the Real Estate Commission and the federal government will take as prima facie evidence the fact that that poster's not there as an intent to discriminate. So not only do you get hit with a $100 a day penalty, it's also prima facie evidence at first look, evidence of an intent to discriminate because that poster's not readily given to everybody who walks in or seen. So failure to display is evidence of discrimination. Now, there are some exceptions to the federal fair housing laws. We're going to go into those a little bit, but there's greater ones because we have to know about the local ones, which are much bigger and more constrictive than the federal laws. Federal laws allow for things like 62 years of age or older communities without allowing children to live there. You know what I'm talking about? Those mature communities, the retirement facilities and things like that. Yes, you're allowed to have a group of people live together who are 62 years of age or older and not allow any children to live with them. In fact, there are many communities throughout the state of New Jersey that have that. Some areas, the law, it goes further and says if any community has a minimum of 85% 55 and older residents who are homeowners in the area, then they could also apply and have their protection against children living in the community as well. So that's a federal exemption. Federal exemptions also go towards religious housing. I doubt very much, because I'm not Jewish, that the Jewish retirement home in Suffern would accept me as a tenant because I'm not Jewish. That's perfectly legal. It's a religious-based housing organization. Because they're a religion, they don't have to comply with the federal fair housing laws. However, remember, the Civil Rights Act of 1866 says you can never discriminate no matter what the rule is. So it's 2:30, guys. It's time to take our break. So I'm going to leave the conversation open, and I'm going to see you back here at 3 o'clock, at which time we're going to finish up this chapter and be done, hopefully by as close to 4 o'clock as we can get. So I will see you at 3. All right, it's 3 o'clock. Time to finish up the day. So I'm going to moderate the conversation and get busy explaining so we can finish up this day by a reasonable hour. Now, there are certain prohibited illegal practices under the federal fair housing laws. The first one is called block busting, also known as panic peddling. Block busting is a situation where a realtor may try to induce homeowners to sell quickly because maybe someone of a certain minority might be moving in, and that could affect pricing in the area. It's highly illegal. It's discriminatory. In fact, I remember as a kid watching the TV show in 1974, I think it was. The TV show was called All in the Family. Now, they couldn't make that show today because the amount of bigoted wording and situations that were presented in the script. But it's a story about Archie Bunker and his wife Edith living in Queens, New York. And Archie's a bigot. Let's face it, he's a bigot from day one. And there's a knock on Archie's door. He gets up and says, yeah, who is he? He says, Archie, it's your neighborhood realtor. He says, what do you want? He goes, I got to tell you, you got to sell now. He goes, what are you talking about? Your values are about to go down through the toilet. It's going to really sink your prices. He goes, what are you talking about? Don't you know who's moving in next door? He goes, no, who? Well, it was George and Wheezy Jefferson, moving on up to the east side, right? To the deluxe apartment in the sky. You remember the Jeffersons, Lionel, George, and Wheezy? Florida, they're made. The fact is that they were black. And the realtor was trying to infer to Archie that if he didn't sell now, he'd lose money if he ever tried to sell in the future. So he had to sell now. This, my friends, is a highly illegal practice. It's called block busting. If you or someone you know of attempts to do something like this, I will guarantee you one thing. You won't do it for long, and you'll probably never see the upside of a real estate license again. Block busting is a highly discriminatory practice and is never allowed to occur, even if it's so tame as a realtor going around knocking on doors saying, hey, you got to move now because, tax is going to go up through the sky pretty soon if those schools get built, so you got to sell now. Panic peddling is never an acceptable practice by realtors and is completely outlawed in the state of New Jersey. However, it does seem to persist in some areas. Now, I don't want to go into details, but there are certain areas in the state where non-realtors are knocking on doors telling people either sell now and get the maximum, or if they don't sell now, house's value is going to go through the ground. It does occur still, and it is still illegal. So realtors can never practice block busting. Steering, where you're literally directing people on where you think they should live. Well, that's completely ridiculous, guys. Some minority comes in my office, wants to buy a house, so I only show that person houses in minority areas where people like them live. That's wrong. A buyer has the right to live wherever they want to live so long as they can financially qualify. Not where you or someone else decides that it would be a good idea for them to live here because you feel that it should be comfortable there. That's completely wrong. It's called racial steering and it's completely illegal. Redlining, mostly used by mortgage companies and banks and insurance companies to deny coverage, policy, or protection because you want to buy or live in a certain area. Banks, when doing mortgages, would say, okay, we're going to define these two neighborhoods, these areas. We're not going to lend in those neighborhoods because of the high crime rate, the drug use, the civil disobedience, all kinds of things. So we're not going to lend money in those areas. You can't do that. Buyers have a right to live wherever they want. If they qualify for the loan, it does not matter where they want to live. They have a right to buy that house. So block busting, steering, and redlining are three federally prohibited practices that realtors can never participate in. Now, as far as enforcement goes under the federal fair housing law, if a person feels that their rights were discriminated against under the federal fair housing laws, they have 1 year in which to file a complaint in any federal office building in the state of New Jersey, and there's at least 5 of them across the state, where there's a HUD office, Housing and Urban Development. They can file a complaint about discrimination in any one of those HUD offices in the state within 1 year of it being occurring. If found guilty, now here's a note worthy of your notes. If found guilty, under the 14th edition that you have, it states, enforcement on page 67, that for the first offense, an offender could face a fine as high as $21,039 for the first violation. However, and please make a note of this, you don't need the 13th edition to confirm it, I'm just telling you. The state still asks the question about federal fair housing, if they even ask the question. I'm told they don't. And if they do answer the question, according to the 13th edition, the limit for the first offense is $19,787. So on our chapter review and the state exam and the school exam, if you are asked a question about the first offense under a federal fair housing penalty, the limit for the test purposes would be $19,787. That's because PSI is still testing under they don't even make the 13th edition book anymore, guys. This is how far behind PSI is. They still even haven't caught up to the fact that the tax laws changed 2.5 years ago. So just so you know, PSI will be testing you. And if they do ask a question about this, the answer will be 19,787. Just so you're aware. You don't need the 13th edition book to confirm this. If you have a copy of the 13th, you'll know it to be true. But the fact is, you have the 14th edition. They don't make the 13th edition anymore. Can't even get your hands on a copy. If you can confirm that. But again, PSI is still testing under that edition. Now, there's only 2 changes since the 13th edition changed to the 14th edition. One of them is the limit on the federal fair housing penalty if found guilty. The other change has to do with the 2018 tax code changes. We're going to talk about that when we talk about mortgages. So I'm giving you plenty of notice, plenty of information about those 2 differences in the book. So, and I'm going to tell you this, I don't think the state even questions you on the limit for penalty under the Federal Fair Housing Act. So this whole discussion is moot if they don't ask you the question. But in case they do, just remember, under the test, it would be $19,787. Now, please don't call the school and say, I want a copy of the 13th edition. What's the big difference? I need to know different. There's no difference except those 2 items. That one offense limit and the Tax Code Act of 2018. And we'll talk about that Tuesday when we talk about mortgages. There's no other differences. So don't worry. You're still getting the information you need to pass the exam. But I'm just pointing out the only 2 differences in the editions. That's all. Now, the New Jersey law against discrimination, the other body of law we have to be concerned about. And before I start, did anybody have any questions about the federal fair housing laws and how it applies? I'm sorry, Gary, no. Where did you see age as a protected class anywhere? Age is not a protected class in housing discrimination. It is not a protected class. That's what you're just saying? So I got it. Okay, correct. I thought you were asking. How is this different than gentrification marketing enticing homeowners to sell? How is what different, Ayana? Give me some comparison of what you're talking about. Give me context. I'm not sure what you're asking. How is what different? Blockbusting. Well, first of all, gentrification marketing. Are they introducing any effect that their housing values are going to go down because of the introduction of a new component in the neighborhood? I doubt it. They're saying maybe to maximize the return on your investment, you may want to consider upgrading your home to match others. But it's not going to say you're going to lose value and you better sell now because of that. So there's a complete difference. Okay, no problem, Jennifer. Okay, anybody else before we move on with the New Jersey laws against discrimination? Mark, did you have a question? Can an agent suggest different areas to buy to a client if they are asked or new to the area? One of the questions, Mark, your broker's going to train you on how to interview buyers. One of the questions I always ask is, do you have an area in which you'd like to move to specifically in mind? We're new to the area, we don't know the area. Then you may have to take them on a tour and do some educational presentation about different towns, values, taxes, schools, all that stuff. Or at least sit down and have a conversation with them. Okay. Age is not considered under familial status, right? Correct. All right. Robert, again, any last questions before I move on? I do want to move on, and I do want to get out of here at some point today. I'll wait for your question, Robert. Was there a question, Robert? In my town, there's a housing complex of 600 units being built. 90 will be allocated to affordable housing. Unfortunately, some of my neighbors are saying move out before the prices drop. No comment, Robert. I have no comment on that. When you started talking about the federal fair housing laws and first offense, this is not the current slide, correct? No, I'm moving on to New Jersey law against discrimination. So, okay. All right, let's move on then. New Jersey law against discrimination. Well, first of all, let's observe it's obviously much more encompassing than the federal fair housing laws. In New Jersey, protected classes cover race, color, national origin, ancestry, nationality, creed, or religion, sex, gender identity or expression, affectional or sexual orientation, marital status, civil union status, domestic partner status, familial status, pregnancy or breastfeeding, actual or perceived physical or mental disabilities, source of lawful income used for mortgage or rental payments, and liability for service in the armed forces of the United States. Now, many of these things have not been covered under the federal fair housing laws. New Jersey is very proactive in making sure that these classifications are protected. New Jersey in 2013 was one of the first states to amend their protections to include same-sex marriages. So we are very proactive in New Jersey, but as a question raised before, when you don't see in here is age. Age is not a protected class in housing. So if someone wants to apply for an apartment in an area and the manager deems they're too old, that's a perfectly legit reason to not accept them as a tenant, believe it or not. Age is not a protected class, but the rest of these categories are. Prohibited activities in New Jersey are refusing to sell, rent, lease, assign, or sublease as a means of discrimination. For licensees, refusing to offer property or to negotiate transactions as a means of discrimination or lying about the availability of property is completely prohibited. Can't do this stuff. Also prohibited are changing the terms of real estate transactions or offering special facilities or services to any person or groups as a means of discrimination, or being involved with any expression, direct or indirect, of any limitation based on discrimination. Guys, you can't change conditions of transactions or be involved in any statement or advertising using discriminatory words. It's completely inappropriate and unacceptable. Now, there are some exceptions to New Jersey laws, just like the federal fair housing laws, but these are much more restrictive. So these are the more apropos things to know about as far as exceptions. Number one, rooms, apartments, or flats in certain types of housing to be restricted to members of one sex. They're talking about boarding houses, rooming houses, and owner-occupied houses. These have certain exemptions under the federal fair housing law that, let's say I own a 7-bedroom home near Montclair State. If I wanted to, I could rent all the rooms out to female members only and have no males be able to live in the complex, because I would designate my property as a boarding or rooming house, not a public apartment complex, and I can get away with that. So long as I don't use discriminatory words in an ad and I don't use the services of a realtor, I can get away with it. Religious-based organizations discriminate based on religion. Yes, remember I told you I'm not Jewish and they don't allow me in the Jewish retirement home? That's what they're talking about here. A third exception is an owner-occupant can discriminate against any reason except for race in the rental of a second family unit or a unit in the single family home. So what it's saying is an owner occupant of a single or two family residential building, a person who lives there and owns the building, can discriminate for any reason under the sun except for race when it comes to renting out apartments in that building. The only thing they can't discriminate against is race. There's no exception to the Civil Rights Act of 1866. So if you don't like straight people, you can say no straight people allowed, but you can't use an ad to say that. It must be verbal. And you cannot use the services of a realtor. That's imperative. Understand that. There's other exceptions like private organizations. The Sons of Italy will not allow me in as a member. Why? Because I'm a Norski. I'm Norwegian / half Norwegian, half Irishman. They don't allow me in the Sons of Italy. Well, why not? Because I'm not Italian. That's discriminatory. No, it's not. It's a private organization. They can do that. So understand, private companies can discriminate. And here's another kick in the head. Cooperatives, co-ops, are privately run businesses. Therefore, they can discriminate based on any reason except for race to deny someone occupancy in a cooperative by that very selective co-op board. Perfectly legal because it's not housing, they're not selling housing, and it's a private company. So they're exempt under 2 exemptions. There's also one other, and that was the 62 and older communities in New Jersey. So if you live in or want to live in a community where there's no children, if you qualify at 62 years of age or older, you can move into those complexes and not have to put up with little kids screaming and running around all day. I don't know, it kind of like makes my neighborhood, just saying. But anyway, that's the situation. All right, moving on. Under the New Jersey law of discrimination, the requirements are, this also applies to loans for real estate transactions, whether by institutions or private individuals. You cannot discriminate in who they lend money to based on these categories. It must be purely on qualifications to repay the loan. Block busting is prohibited. Anti-discrimination poster also is one of New Jersey specific. It's on page 71 in your textbook. This must be put up to the federal fair housing poster, that equal housing opportunity poster, and the same rules apply. If it's not present, $100 a day and a fine. And if it's not present, used as prima facie evidence of an intent to discriminate. Also, in the real estate business, when taking listings, whether for sale or rent, whenever taking a listing for a residential sale or a residential rental, I must accompany the listing agreement with what's called the notice at listing, otherwise known as the Attorney General's memorandum. On page 72 and 73 is the Attorney General's memorandum. In essence, the agreement says, dear Mr. Consumer, when signing your listing agreement with this realtor, he is duty bound never to discriminate in his business practices, so he can't discriminate. Also, if you have, Mr. Consumer, any intentions to discriminate, you must make that known to your realtor so he does not enter into a relationship with you. What? No, I'm being serious here. Every time I go for a residential listing for a sale or rental of an apartment, I must bring along a copy of the Attorney General's memorandum, attach it to the listing, and tell the consumer, by the way, the Attorney General's memorandum is attached to that listing of which you will be getting a copy after you sign it. It states that I, as a realtor, cannot discriminate in my business practices. And it also says if you have any intention to discriminate, Mr. Seller, that you have to tell me now before I agree to list your property so I prevent myself from getting in a discriminatory action with you. Do you understand what I'm saying? If they say yes, then proceed, sign the listing, and do your job. But if they say no, I need to discriminate against somebody, you say I can't take your business and you should walk away. You're going to reject the listing? Yes, because it could cost me my license if I go. I cannot participate in any discriminatory behavior, guys. And the Attorney General memorandum states that. So apparently, who's it? Sean, you have a big question you've been trying to ask me. What's your question? Hold on. For end of class, then ask me at the end of class. Okay, moving on. All right, state regulations on rentals. These are rental situations. First of all, you cannot discriminate on source of legal income for rental or purchase. And you can't discriminate based on children in a family. This is targeted for those owners of property who wish not to rent to Section 8 tenants. They're afraid because, oh, those are bad people. Guys, I'm going to tell you something right off the top of my head. These people are not bad people. Now, there's always some bad apples. I'm not going to negate that. But these are people who generally need a helping hand. Public assistance in housing, Section 8, is designed to do just that. Give people an extra leg up to try to find a place to live that's clean and reliable and safe. Many of these people need help. And Section 8 housing is that source that gives them that help to find a place to live. You cannot discriminate based on source of legal income in housing. So if someone says, hey, I get public assistance, can I rent an apartment? If your apartment is approved for Section 8, then you must allow them. Also, if you have a problem renting a one-bedroom apartment to a same-sex couple, then you have a problem about discrimination, and you can't be doing this job because then you may have a problem about renting an apartment to them. Can't have a problem, guys. You must be colorblind in every way when doing your business. Guys, I'm going to tell you an honest secret here. The only color I see is green. If someone can afford to do something, I don't care if you're purple, polka dotted, yellow, green, orange, purple, pink, white, black. It doesn't matter to me. You got a checkbook and can spend that cash? I'm your guy. Because I'm in it to make money, not to enforce my beliefs on someone else. No. And that's really what discriminatory is. You're not of what I think, then you shouldn't be allowed. That's discrimination. Now, leases cannot be voided upon the birth of a child. So if you're renting a one-bedroom apartment to a couple and the rooming occupancy requirement is no more than 2 persons per bedroom, and they have a baby, you can't deny them the rental because they had a baby. No. In fact, that baby's pretty much going to stay in that room for quite a time before it's ready to move out into its own area. So you can't be the enforcer of these laws, guys. You cannot prohibit pets and service animals. You can prohibit pets, but you cannot prohibit service and or guide animals. It does not say emotional support animals. And there's a big issue right now trying to be settled in the New Jersey courts about what is a protected animal. So if I say no pets and you are blind and use a dog as a seeing eye dog, then that's not a pet and you're allowed to occupy. But if you need to carry around your 12-foot long boa constrictor because it's an emotionally support animal, chances are I may not allow you tenancy if you don't answer certain questions in a certain way. And your brokers will train you on how to qualify these people. And I don't want to get into a discussion about what's a service animal and what's not. It's just, we'll leave it at that and you can talk to your brokers about it. And you can never discriminate against someone with AIDS or alcoholism, because alcoholism is classified as a disease and a disability. What about smoking? Smoking is prohibited in almost every private residence, unless you own the building and say, I can smoke in my own house, you can do that. But if you're renting an apartment and they have a no smoking policy, that means no smoking inside. You can go outside, maybe there's a designated area, but you can't smoke in the building. So be aware of what the rules and protections are. New Jersey law prohibits discrimination in housing by real estate agents, brokers, financial institutions, property owners, landlords, building supers, and their agents and employees. Did you hear that? Property owners and landlords, building supers, and their agents and employees. No matter who you are, if you're in the housing business, you can't discriminate. When it comes to sale or a rental or a lease, you can't discriminate. You can't use discriminatory words when listing or advertising real property. All rental applications must be treated equally by all applicants. And if you feel like your rights were discriminated against under the New Jersey law against discrimination, then here are the enforcement procedures. You must locate a Department of Public Safety in any public safety building. Your municipal hall is usually where it is. Then you must file a complaint within 6 months of the occurrence of that thing. And if found guilty, doesn't matter if it's 13th or 14th edition, guys, the result is the same. The amount of the penalty of a first offense can be as high as $10,000. So guys, don't discriminate in your business practices. Then you don't have to worry about making massive payouts and losing your license and everything else. Questions, Nicole, you had a question. In Bolivar, you had a question or not? Was there a question or two? Do all adults moving into an apartment have to sign contract and apply with agent? Depends on what the rules are. And we'll talk about that Monday when we talk about leasehold interest in property, leases, landlords, and tenant scenarios, that stuff. We'll talk about that Monday. The chart on page 78 as an example, that walk-to shopping is permitted, but I remember that class yesterday you had saying, all right, the religious aspect makes, okay. Can we just clarify a bit more on the walking aspect? Guys, let me put it this way. Your MLSs have filters in them. If you put in certain words, you're going to be denied the listing. Therefore, you're going to have to change your words to comply with the MLS-friendly jargon that you must use. And I'm going to tell you right now, a couple of the MLSs have walking distance as a discriminatory word. Some of them do. I'm just telling you that from experience. Does the minor have to be listed? Okay, that's a listing. That's a question for Monday, Jason. The people is allowed to smoke just if the landlord want to. I'm sorry, because I hear problems when tenants say someone smoked weed and they want to call the police. Again, maybe that's a question better answered Monday. Let's talk about it Monday, Bolivar, because we'll have all the discussion about rental scenarios at that time. 1 year to file a Fed complaint, 6 months for the state of New Jersey. Correct, Marissa. What's the difference between the 1978 fine and the 10,000? The 1970-87 is the federal offense. The 10,000 is the state laws offense. We talked about first offense. Do we need to know about? No, you don't need about second and multiple offenses. Fine for discrimination is 10K first offense. Under the New Jersey laws, yes. Okay, so let's move on. Zoning discrimination. Mount Laurel 1 and Mount Laurel 2. What's that all about? This is a situation that came about because of housing discrimination based on income. It all started back in the 1970s, precisely 1971, when workers in factories and manufacturing facilities and office spaces who usually work for lower income levels wanted to buy housing where they were working in Mount Laurel. They found out Mount Laurel was a very ritzy town. They couldn't afford to live there. Several of the workers got together and hired an attorney and argued the fact in front of a court that those workers should have a right to housing in those areas where they're working. So the judge agreed. The Mount Laurel Decision 1 said Mount Laurel must provide opportunities for low and moderate income earners in housing. Therefore, they created the rule that for every 10 units built for housing, 2 of them must be reserved for low and moderate income earners. In other words, anytime a developer goes out and builds a big complex or any housing units at all, 20% of the production must be set aside and priced so that low and moderate income earners could afford to buy them. That was the first Mount Laurel 1 decision. So whenever Mount Laurel built an apartment complex, let's say 100 units, 20 of those units were set aside for low and moderate income earners so they could qualify to rent there and live there. Whenever housing, like condominium complexes, were built, 20% of the units were set aside and buyers were allowed to use 20% of those units to qualify as low and moderate income earner units. Mount Laurel 2 came in 1983 when certain towns refused to supply units. What happened was the Mount Laurel 1 decision was extended throughout the entire state. Every community must afford low and moderate income earners housing opportunities. But certain towns, and I'll name them, I don't have any problem with this, like Saddle River, Franklin Lakes, Alpine, Chatham, Mendham, pretty prestigious areas, right? They said, we're not supplying these housing units. In fact, we'll go to cities and towns like Patterson, Camden, Newark, Trenton, and say, here's some money, you build the units. So we're supplying the money to supply those units. So really, we're really abiding by the spirit of the law. The Mount Laurel 2 decision said, no, no, no. Every town must supply the units. So now towns like Franklin Lakes, Saddle River, Alpine, Chatham, Mendham, and the rest have to actually supply these units to low and moderate income earners. Now, low and moderate income earners can qualify to buy these things, but there's an income level you can't go above to qualify to buy these. So if you're interested in finding out more, you can always contact the New Jersey Council on Affordable Housing is now the council or division that handles the Mount Laurel 1 and 2 decision issues. It's all covered under what's called COA, Council on Affordable Housing. And you can call up the state division to find out what the requirements for low and moderate income earner qualifications. So this was a situation where housing was being discriminated against because of income levels. Moving on, I told you you're going to be charged with abiding by the Code of Ethics. Well, you're also going to swear and abide by the Code of Equal Opportunity. which means it's a standard of conduct that all realtors agree to abide by and affirmatively pledge to offer equal services to all persons. Again, guys, you need to be colorblind in your practice. You don't care what color or what nationality or what religion or anything else they do. The only thing you want to know is, can they qualify to do the job? And if they can, I want to be the agent getting a commission from helping them. Now, there's also something called the HUD-NAR Fair Housing Partnership. HUD is the Department of Housing and Urban Development, a federal position. NAR is the National Association of Realtors. Together, they form opportunities for realtors to volunteer on a basis to talk about fair housing policies, hold special events, educational seminars, and they also sponsor builds like Habitat for Humanity builds. I've been on two as a volunteer. They're very, very informative. They make you work, but it's a very rewarding experience. Whether you do this or not doesn't matter to me because it's not mandatory. If you see a question about HUD-NAR partnership, it usually has to do with voluntarism, because everything they do is on a volunteer basis only. And finally, implications for brokers and salespersons. Number one, must display the poster in your brokerage. Every broker is required to display the Federal Fair Housing Equal Housing Opportunity poster and the New Jersey Law Against Discrimination poster. They must be promptly displayed stating discrimination against the company policy with state and federal laws. That's the state and federal posters. That'll do it. And make proper responses when clients express discriminatory desires. I'm sorry, I can't participate in behavior like that. That goes against my licensing requirements. And advertising should never describe buyers or renters. It should describe the property. And one last point, and that has to do with what it says, testing. The Real Estate Commission in New Jersey hires what I'll term secret shoppers called testers. And they show up in the damnedest places asking some weird questions sometimes. These are people hired by the commission to go out and test to see what brokers are saying and doing in the public. So if you're approached by somebody and they start asking some very weird questions, be on your guard. This may be a tester for the Real Estate Commission to see how you respond to certain scenarios and questions. And if you say the wrong things, they may be inviting you down for a hearing in Trenton to explain yourself. But more like they're out there just making sure that people aren't doing stupid things and saying stupid things. So anyway, that's chapter 4 in a nutshell. Was there any basic questions for follow-up before I bring up the Q&A for the reviews at the end of chapter 4? Abdul, Yasan, you got a question? No? Robert, my town, I'm sorry, there's a couple questions. When I moved to Mount Laurel 94, I bought, I bought the home of Ethel Lawrence, the woman who started the fair. Oh, my goodness, that's interesting. I learned the whole story after we moved in, including that she passed away in the home. Just saying, sharing. Anyone who looked her up and see that. That's interesting, Michelle. Thank you for sharing that. Wow, there's firsthand knowledge there then. My town just lost the court case against affordable housing and had 90 affordable units, and also get penalized by the judge for $335,000 for challenging the law. Yeah, New Jersey's forcefully going after towns to comply now. Posters are mandatory for brokers to put in their offices. Yes, Ayana. All right. Can a listing have a description for an ideal tenant? Nah. The listing should describe the property, not the tenant. I just really just said that a couple minutes ago. Drug addiction is not seen as disease like alcoholism in the context of anti-discriminatory laws. Correct? Correct, Marissa. And Sean, are you accepting questions after review? Yes, I will, and I'll stick around for any questions you got. But if there's any other questions, hit me now so we can proceed with the review. And not seeing any. Oh, there is. Let's see what it is. Are there rules about posting the posters on websites? That is up to your broker to discuss with you, Justin. So you need to know what the broker's policy is about advertising on websites. Remember, it also has to have the broker's name and everything on it. So chances are he'd probably say, that's a good idea. You should put it on your website, or at least the logos or something like that. All right, moving on. Let's do the review questions, guys, and then I'll come back to see if there's any other questions for follow-up. Now I'm on chapter 4, so here we go. Number 1. At the time the owner listed his home with the salesperson, he informed her of his general dislike of members of a particular ethnic group. The salesperson later shows the home to 2 prospective buyers, one who is a member of this group, and both make an offer. When the owner contacts the agent again, she does not present him with the lower offer, which was made by a member of the minority group. The salesperson has violated what? So those who answered, again, about 50% of the class, about 74% of you guys got it correct. C, the New Jersey law against discrimination, the federal fair housing laws, both require that you treat minorities the same. Therefore, the offer should have been presented. And the real estate licensing law, because all written offers must be presented, and they didn't. So C was correct. Number 2, which of the following acts is permitted under the Federal Fair Housing Act? Which of the following acts is permitted under the Federal Fair Housing Act? And from those who did respond, 76% of you correctly answered C, refusing to sell a home to an individual because he or she has poor credit history. Completely acceptable. Absolutely. Number 3, the Civil Rights Act of 1866 is unique because the act And from those who did respond, 60% of you correctly answered D for dog. Covers only the areas of race and color. That is correct. It is only covers race and color, nothing else. Number 4, I hear they're moving in. There goes the neighborhood. Better listen with me today is an example of very good. Good. 85% of you correctly identified B as the correct answer, block busting. Number 5, the act of channeling home seekers to a particular area, either to maintain or to change the character of the neighborhood, is 95% correctly identified C, steering, as the answer. Yes, that's called racial steering. Number 6, which would not be permitted under the Federal Fair Housing Act? And from those answering, good 50% of you correctly identified B as the correct answer. The owner of a 20-unit apartment building rents to women only. Can't be an apartment building. That's a public tenancy. It must be a privately owned building. So B for boy is the correct answer. The article, if anybody wants to challenge me, says certain apartments. Number 7, under federal law, families with children may be refused rental or purchase in buildings where occupancy reserved exclusively for those aged at least a little trouble with this one, but a good 52% of you correctly identified C, 62 years of age, as correct. Number 8, guiding prospective buyers to a particular area because the agent feels they belong there may lead to and a good 70% of you correctly answered C, steering. Yes. Number 9, refusal to rent to someone because they receive public assistance violates. The answer of which only 25% of you correctly identified was A, the New Jersey statutes. Only under the New Jersey law does it prohibit discrimination because of public assistance or source of legal income. Number 10, a policy of never renting to persons with prison records violates. Two out of 3 of you correctly identified A as the correct answer, no law. In New Jersey, it is currently still allowable to discriminate based on criminal records. I said currently because New Jersey legislature under the Civil Rights Division is trying to eliminate criminal records as a criteria for screening tenants. Believe it or not. New York has already passed this law, and you cannot discriminate in New York based on criminal records, but you still can in New Jersey. So be aware of that moving into the future. That may change. Number 11, refusing an apartment to a couple because they are unmarried violates. 70% of you got C correct, the law against discrimination. Very good. Number 12, a mortgage company makes it a practice not to lend money to potential homeowners attempting to purchase property located in a predominantly Black neighborhood. This practice is known as 84% of you got it right. A, redlining. Very good. Redlining. Number 13, a court found a landlord guilty of illegal discrimination and ordered him to rent his next available apartment to a person who was unfairly hurt. The court order is an example of a or an 63% of you got it. C, an injunction. C is correct. 14. The seller who requests prohibited discrimination in the showing of a home should be told 86% of you correctly answered D, all of the above. Yes, every one of those things apply. D is the best answer. Number 15, a good precaution against even unintentional discrimination is to and again, 2/3, 66% correctly identified D as the correct answer. All of these would be correct. Every one of those things you should do. Number 16, the Federal Fair Housing Amendments of 1988 added which of the following as new protected classes? I just reposted Chris Stern's contact information if anybody wanted that. Federal Fair Housing Amendments of 1988 added which of the following as a new protected class? And 79% of you got it correct, and it would be B for boy, disabilities, physical and mental, and familial status. Correct. Number 17, the fine for the first violation of the Federal Fair Housing Act would be as much as I just also added my email contact information if anybody needed to reach out to me. I just posted the homework link once again. Hopefully it's working tonight. There shouldn't be a problem. And I did post an area or link to a place where you can leave us a review. If you think this was well worth it or not, please give us a review. We'd appreciate it. So the answer to number 17, remember we're using the edition that covers what's being tested on, would be C, 19,787. I know the 14th edition says 2139, and I would not give you a wrong answer on this question. But again, I'm going to tell you right now, real estate commissions probably won't even test on this question, just so you know. Number 18, but if they did, C would be the correct answer. Let's leave it at that. Number 18, the only defense against an accusation of illegal discrimination is proof that it And from those responding, a good 80% of you did agree to correctly answer D, didn't occur. Yes, that would be the best defense. Number 19, undercover investigations to see whether fair housing practices are being followed as sometimes made by, was the last thing we talked about. Hopefully it's still in that short-term memory bank up top, or else you got a problem. 83% of you got it. A, testers. Testers was the term. Number 20, participation in the HUD-NAR Fair Housing Partnership is and from those who did respond, about 74% of you agreed and are correct that C, voluntary, is correct. Yes, remember I told you if you got a question about this, it usually has to do with voluntarism. 21 complaints brought under the New Jersey law against discrimination. 65% of you correctly answered B for boy. It must be filed within 180 days after the alleged discriminatory action occurs. If it was a federal offense, you have 1 year to file a complaint. Number 22, the New Jersey law against discrimination. The New Jersey law against discrimination. C, permits an owner occupant of 1 or 2 family residence to deny housing to a tenant based on applicant's age. Age is not a protected class. C is correct. 23, the Mount Laurel court decisions attempt to correct housing discrimination based on And again, from the limited response we got, we did get a very good response percentage. That's 90% of you correctly identified B, income, as the source. Yes, it was discrimination based on income. Last couple questions. Number 24, at the time a property is listed, the homeowner must give a copy of the homeowner must be given a copy of the, remember it was called the notice at listing? What was that one again? And 60% of you correctly identified C, the Attorney General's Memorandum on Discrimination, as the correct answer. C is correct. And finally, last question for review. If a New Jersey salesperson sent bright yellow postcards to all homeowners in a neighborhood warning them that several immigrant families were planning to move into the neighborhood and suggesting that property values were about to fall, the salesperson would be guilty of which of the following? 94% of you correctly said D, blockbusting. Very good, very good. All right, and so ends another presentation for your chapters. Chapter 3 and 4 were accomplished today. Now, before I let you go, homework chapters 3 and 4. And if you didn't get a chance to download 1 and 2, download them tonight. Do all 4. We'll go for all 4 chapters first thing in the morning. Tomorrow, 3 chapters, guys. Chapter 5, 6, and 7. It's going to be an intense day. So prepare, pre-read, come to school ready, and we're going to have a good conversation tomorrow. Thank you for your participation today. If you have any additional